Welcome to this CoJMC 161 lecture. This lecture is covering website organization and navigation. When it comes to website organization, website layout, there are a pretty much unlimited different number of ways that you can organize and lay out your website. There are some conventions that most web developers anymore are following. For instance, most websites have some form of a header at the top of the page. Most websites have some form of a footer at the bottom of the page. And then between the header and the footer is typically the main content area. Occasionally with columns, occasionally with navigation. More and more, though, you see navigation becoming basically either directly under the header or part of the header. And the reason for that is because of the rise of mobile web browsing. Navigation along the left, typically along the left-hand side of the page, is difficult to render and problematic on a mobile device. So most web developers are simply abandoning left side navigation in favor of a header style bar navigation across the top, because it's much easier, much more user friendly for mobile users to have that across the top, and it's easier to have a consistent look and feel of a website between the mobile device and the desktop device if your navigation is a horizontal bar. Some statistics that it's important to note about navigation is that navigation, according to the GVU's Worldwide Web User Survey, is third most important issue facing the internet, topped by censorship and privacy. And really the important thing to note about navigation is that it is for the user's goals. So as a developer, you need to be aware of what the user is looking for when they come to your site. Make it easy for them to find, because really if they can't navigate through and find what they're looking for, they're just going to leave. There's 100 other websites out there that probably will give them the same or similar information to meet their goals. So the important thing, one of the most important things, is to make your navigation clear. Make it straightforward and make it very obvious that what it's going to take them to is what they're looking for, or that what it's going to take them to is indicated in the name of the link itself. You don't want your readers to get lost on our website, and you don't want your readers to have to search for a nav. They don't want to have to search for navigation to find what they're already sort of searching for. So trying to search for a nav in order to search for something else it's going to cost them time, and it's probably going to cost you as a developer. It's going to cost you users. So several ways to test the navigation is to get other people to look at it. Use focus groups would be one example, or you could use usability tests. There are a couple types of usability tests. There's the trunk test, where you would drop a user in on a page somewhere in the middle of the website. Their job would then be to figure out what page they were on and then how to get back to the home page. And your job would be then, of course, to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. It's sort of similar to if you were dumped in the trunk of a car, driven around for a half hour, and then let out in the middle of some city, and your goal was to figure out where you were and how to get back home. That's why it's called the trunk test. Task-oriented tests are similar, but the users start at the home page and are given a specific task, such as find contact information, or find a resume, or find somebody's bio. And then as the developer, you observe, see where they want to click, where they want to navigate to, where they think naturally would like to go to find whatever it is they're supposed to find, and then see how long it takes them to get there, and anything that they run into, like dead ends along the way or frustrations that they can't find. Here's a great example of bad web design. There's no real organization here. Things are just sort of randomly thrown on the page. In fact, There's no convention, there's no header, there's no footer. Well, if there is a header, it's got weather in it, I think, would be, by conventional definition, that would be the location for the header. There's no navigation, there's just buttons kind of thrown in here and there, and it's really sometimes difficult to tell if you navigate, if you're actually on this page, what's a button and what's not, because some of the images are buttons and some of the text is buttons. And there's a huge, great, glaring example of just bad text, bad content. It says click here. I don't even know what that's supposed to do. Click here. Does it blow up the website? Does it take me to somewhere I can sign up? I have no idea. I probably am not going to click it because I don't know what it does. The design of the layout is very kind of unappealing. It's just, everything's just centered. There's no organizational hierarchy. I don't know what the most important thing on the page is, aside from maybe it's the biggest thing. It's control driving skills, which I'm guessing is the logo, the site ID. I don't know. It's kind of a mess. So let's take a look at some tools. Real quick, we're going to run through some of the options you have for developing websites. At the very basic level, you have HTML and CSS. That's what we'll be learning in this class, is how to code web pages using those two basic HTML and CSS, those two basic web development languages. Building on top of those, it used to be popular that you would add Flash elements to make interactivity, to make animation, to make things fun on a page. Any more web developers are really leaving Flash in droves because Flash is not compatible with most mobile devices. It's very processor intense and it's just kind of clunky. There's a lot of things you can do now using JavaScript and jQuery that Flash was basically used, they're being used to replace Flash in most instances. There's a type of web design called templated design. Templated design makes use of a content management system. WordPress would be an example of that. Drupal will be another example of a content management system. Squarespace and Wix are web development systems that use templated design, where essentially you pick a template, you can customize the template, and you just drag and drop elements or content into those templates in the places where they're appropriate. It's very easy web design, and you don't really have to know anything about coding or development to do it. It's a good idea to still understand sort of the concepts, the design concepts behind it, because you can still really make ugly websites even if you don't know what you're doing. But that's another way you can build websites using those templates. And then the replacement essentially for Flash would be things like JavaScript or jQuery languages, which can build interactivity into your website. It's very lightly, so they're lightweight, they download quickly, they run very cleanly, and they work on mobile devices a lot better than Flash. And well, Apple devices never supported Flash, so that's one big reason to steer clear of it and in favor of JavaScript and jQuery. Some of the other advanced languages that you may run into at some point would be things like PHP, Ruby, or Perl. But the most common interactivity and some of the easiest to use without a steep learning curve would be JavaScript and jQuery. If you're looking for ideas on cool website designs, there are a number of different pages and websites out there that are dedicated to finding the coolest looking websites and focusing on them. In fact, coolhomepages.com has been around for a long time, and they categorize and organize their opinion of what is the coolest web pages. And one of the web trends actually for 2015 is circles on web pages. And so there's websites out there that will give you ideas for what's trending on websites. You can have a good idea of what you should or should not be doing, and it'll tell you what's in, what's out as far as web design conventions and ideas. And then some mistakes that developers often make. Number one, and this is probably the most important one to me, is non-standard navigation. You have navigation in this example basically in the middle of what appears to be content. And so the user isn't really sure. As a user, I would not be positive that this is actually the menu for the website. I want to look at the top of the page or on the left-hand bar column to see navigation, but there isn't anything, so I only have to assume, based on what doesn't exist, that this in the middle of the page is the navigation. But again, I don't know. I'm not sure. And especially if I'm new to this page, I probably am not going to trust that I'm able to find what I'm looking for here, simply because I really can't find the navigation very well. Things like generic labels. Something that's just sort of generic to any business or any company is a bad idea. You really want to be specific and be different. I mean, it's great to follow some conventions, but it's great to also be very unique in certain areas. Drop-down menus are something else I would never recommend using. Even if you have a ton of menu options, there are always better or alternative ways of displaying those navigation options. Drop-down menus essentially are bad for usability, and search engine optimization really kind of chokes on them as well. It's just a bad idea all around. Sort of along the lines of drop-down menus, you know, one alternative to having drop-down menus would be to have too many menu items. I mean, we have too many menu items, so let's just throw them into a drop-down menu instead. Probably a bad idea because your user just gets overwhelmed. There's too much to look at. There's too much going on. This page is already very crowded and sort of disorganized and cluttered to begin with. There's tons of, I don't know if those are ads or what on the right side, but then there's tons of just sort of randomly placed images, and it just feels cluttered. Then to add all this navigation on the left hand side, this is secondary nav because there is a main menu bar across the top of this page. There's just too much. Probably the best way to handle this would be to recategorize and sort of reimagine and maybe split menu items or put menu items into submenus by content type, or recategorize and rethink the priority. Like, what's the most important few items to have, and put those on, and then make submenus maybe below that, or drop. I mean, in this case, you may have to use drop downs to fit everything on. But a recategorization, a rethinking of what's important to have in the menu is important. Another mistake that developers and especially beginning web developers do is to use buttons instead of links. And that would be, an example would be using images as buttons to link to any website or anything really. One of the most common things I ever see is using icons to link to social media. And that's probably not a bad idea, as long as you can make them search friendly. There are ways to do that. You can add, alt attributes, add some function, some search engine compatibility to it, titles, things like that within the HTML to help. Some of the reasons that it's a bad idea to use buttons instead of links is that buttons are harder to update. You're talking about an image, and if you want to change what it says, you have to go back to Photoshop, re-export the image, re-upload the image. If it's text in the HTML, you're just basically changing the HTML file and just retyping what your button says. Images load more slowly than text. That's another reason to use links instead of buttons. And you can customize fonts on links, which is very useful. So while it may look different and interesting to use buttons instead of text links, I would still recommend, for the most part, especially in navigation. In your menu, it's a I highly recommend using text instead of buttons in your menu. You know, if you're talking about little links to your social media in your footer or some other part of your page, it's probably something you could get away with, and that would be fine. Something else to keep in mind that most users probably don't think about, it's just something that's sort of subconsciously affects them, is the order of the menu buttons. So what's the most important menu button? Should probably be first or last, because studies have shown that the first and last items are the most effective because that's what users remember. They'll remember what the first button was, they'll remember what the last button was. The stuff in the middle sort of gets lost, they don't recall. So make your first item the most important, obviously, and then really the hierarchy of importance should go down from there. Typically contact should be last. Most user conventions show contact being at the end of the menu is usually the best place for it, because that's usually where users are going to look for contact. So here's some examples of navigation done well. On the blue bar for Sweat Vac, what a name, we have some nice contrasty text that's very clear and very straightforward and very simple. And that's a good thing for the user, because it doesn't make the users don't want to think. Users want to just be able to see and click, automatically know. Same with this Smith Brothers website menu. It's very clear, it's very straightforward, it's very plain. There's not a lot of design. There's very subtle design that goes into this menu. The Creative NZ gets a little more design heavy, but again, it's still clean. It's still very clear what the menu does. And then this one has a secondary navigation on the left column of the main content, which sort of matches and goes along with the style of the main menu. But here again, we don't have too many options. We don't have too many things to choose from. It's not overwhelming. It's very clear what these buttons are going to take you to. There is some generic in the sort of subtitle area, like who we are, what we do, but then it says, you know, specifically about Creative NZ, so it's very obvious this is specific to this company. So that's all we have for website navigation. Thanks for watching, and good luck.